Mulattoes? You know what mulatto is? Not necessarily. It just means darker skin in Spanish, but it had a meaning that people of African and European descent. And if they're of European descent, what are they? I'm sorry, of African descent?
Slaves.
Or descendants of slaves, and therefore
Less than.
exactly. You notice we're all less than. The English had conquered Ireland, and to justify conquest, they said the Irish were inferior. Teagues were people on loaded ships, the lowest, most menial, awful job on ships, unloading the bottom of the hulls. A jack tar, it's the lowest sailor. Tar is like the lowest graded sailor on a merchant ship. So what's he calling them? All inferiors, all lower class. Adams, like many of the Sons of Liberty, or the leaders of it, were worried that we're losing control of the masses. We wanted to make sure that they didn't turn their anger to somebody else, and we controlled their anger towards the British. By the way, what do we call this kind of father-like attitude?
Paternalistic.
Very paternalistic. This is a cuff, a slapback. So it shows you Adams was upper class at getting his attitude. And so with that, the British didn't pull troops out. Oh, I should add, 4 would be acquitted, 2 would be found guilty, but there was no set punishment then, wouldn't be until the next century. So they took their punishment to the church, and they had M's branded on their thumbs for manslaughter. That was their punishment. Which, yes, hurts, but I guess it's better than being hung. And with that, the British pulled out, tensions went down, but the British are like, well, we still got to get our taxes. So in 1773, the last of the big efforts to do something with the Navigation Acts, the Tea Act. The Tea Act cut the tax, but on tea, ignored all the other taxes, but cut the tax on tea, but found an ingenious way to collect it. They gave a monopoly of tea sale to the East India Company. The East India, what do you call a company that's owned by shareholders? Yeah, joint stock company. And the stockholders were losing money. And the thing is, many of the stockholders were in Parliament. And they're thinking, let's pass a law that will help us get our money back. This is what we call a conflict of interest, using government to get rich. Now, let's see if you can guess if I'm serious or not. This would never happen today. Good answer, yes. In fact, it's probably the worst it's been since I've been alive. That's a long time. But since the 1920s. Now, but back to this. They'd collect the tax. It didn't work for the East India Company. Even though tea was becoming a valuable drink, they didn't really make money. The East India Company, which ran India as colony, they wouldn't really start making money until they found an addictive drug that could peddle to the Chinese. What is that? Opium. Exactly right. Opium. Stay. The colonists were furious. Only companies with a license from the East India Company. And the ironic thing was this. The price for tea, though, actually, in the short run, went down. Normally, if you have a monopoly on something that people want, they can raise the price, can't they? It's something that people want, like tea or water, things that people want. But tea was smuggled in, and this actually undercut the smugglers. Smugglers who were avoiding the taxes were getting rich by charging a premium because they had to go through the danger where they might get caught and even executed for smuggling as pirates. You see the same things today. When a really good example would be the 1920s, when the country tried prohibition and organized crime came in and made a killing selling alcohol at a premium because they're avoiding the law. They were furious when they got rid of prohibition. Just as drug dealers are furious when they do things like legalize marijuana in places like Oregon because they're making a lot of money off it. So, but ironically, in the short run, it undercut them. And so the smugglers would become some of the leading patriots. The most famous would be John Hancock. He was a smuggler. Didn't know much about government or didn't care, but was mad he's being undercut. And since he had a lot of money, he'd be to the First and Second Continental Congress. In fact, he'd be the guy who, because he had this presence and they needed money, gold desperately, he beat the gavel to start meeting. They called him the president of the Senate, of the Congress. We'll come back to Hancock in a sec. So, undercut him. And that's going to lead to the Boston Tea Party. Because the Boston Tea Party, the issue was this. The Patriots looked at it and, okay, they didn't like the tax. But that wasn't the big issue. The Patriots looked at this and, oh yeah, they didn't like the fact that Britain made it pay the tax. And if you don't have much money especially, or you want to accumulate large amounts of money, you don't want to pay tax. But the Patriot argument was control. We will lose control unless the British do this. If we allow them to tax, not only the tax seat, but the big one, if we allow them to give a monopoly to the East India Company, what can they do next? Give a monopoly for a shipping company, tobacco company, rum production, iron, and so on. If we allow them to decide who buys and sells, and it's out of the colonies, we will lose control of our own, using a modern term, we will lose our economy. It will lead to economic ruin. I want to keep adding ON. Economic ruin. Economic, that term wouldn't have made sense back then, but they'll take over. We will have no way to make a living. We'll become dependent on the British. Remember that whole thing about the first rate becoming dependent? And they will control us. And not only that, we will lose our ability to politically control. We'll lose our political control, aka government. They'll break up our assemblies, they'll take our laws. We will lose everything that gave us our independence. We will lose our liberty and become slaves. Which is ironic, a society built a lot of it on the work of slaves. Then again, I guess they know how slaves are treated, so they know. We will become slaves. We will lose our liberty. So that's the argument. So it's a myth now, and people say it all the time, that the Boston Tea Party was about the taxes. No, it was about the monopoly and what that led to. And the government can decide who will be rich and who will be poor. And it has that power today. That's what they feared. So that led to the Tea Party. When the first ships arrived in November of 1973, remember those days? I was around. I remember that. Yeah, it took 200 years. I was old by then. Yeah, I was out of high school. Yeah.
Why does it say under political control?
Letters, kind of. Government.
Why is there that?
G-O-V
What?
apostrophe T. T. So, with that, there were a couple ships from the East India Company. They were scared to unload because there were protests, and they were really scared for their lives for good reason. So North Hall, which is this big meeting hall in Boston, still there, run by the Park Service now. If you ever get a chance to go there, it's really cool. Used to be right like 100 yards from the harbor. They filled a lot in, so it's about a half mile now. But there was a meeting of the Patriots, the Sons of Liberty, and there was speaker after speaker, including Sam Adams, who got fired up about this issue. They're coming to take away everything you have built. They're coming to take away everything you have. Remember when they quartered the troops? Remember what happened? And then all of a sudden the doors burst open and a bunch of Sons of Liberty came running in, dressed up as, anyone know?
Indians.
Mohawk Indians. Now, Mohawks were from here. So no one's going to believe they're Mohawks. And everybody knew the leaders of the Sons of Pioneers were. They weren't hiding. The Mohawk Indians, in fact, American Indians, This was a symbol. In this weird contradiction, or another word for it would be dichotomy, American Indians to the early colonials and early United States represented liberty. When the Europeans first arrived, they had never seen anybody more free, more independent, more rights. It blew their mind. Because in Europe, everybody was subservient to somebody on top. And the idea that regular people can have that right and that freedom and that voice, oh yeah, it scared the leaders. But they represented liberty. So when the brand new United States, right through the Constitution, created their symbol, you've probably seen it. What bird are we talking about there? We all know it's bald eagle, right? And its talent, in the right talent, it holds arrows. That was for American Indians and it represented liberty. By the way, did you catch the contradiction? Yeah. American Indians represented liberty. We also want to take their land because they're uncivilized. Do you get the point here? In 40 years, that whole liberty thing would go away. The United States, citizens of the U.S. would kind of forget that idea. That would justify taking the land down the road. But they ran in, let's get them! And they all charge out. It's not dark because it's November, short days. They run to the pier. There's whale boats, which are like big rowboats. And they jumped on them and rowed out to the first ship. Now, these are sailing vessels. So the guys on the ship, there's about 12 men, crewmen still there. They see this group coming at them, screaming, waving torches, some dressed up as Mohawk. And they're like, oh, God, they can't go anywhere. They actually try to resist. And what happens to them? They get roughed up and thrown overboard. And no one knew how to swim back then. Swimming's a development of the 19th century. So they just kind of flopped around and hoped for the best, you know. I know you always think, everyone knew how to swim. No, actually, swimming as we know it came about in the 1800s. I can still remember it well. But with that, and they went to the tea. How did they transport tea back in 1773? Yeah, bricks of tea, because it might rot on the way. And so they would basically make it a powder and then crush it. And so it made a hard brick about this long and about that thick. And they'd sell a chunk of it. They'd break it off and get a chunk. You break it up with a hammer and then run water through it. Well, they took these bricks and threw them overboard and then burned the ship down to the waterline. And then they jumped on the rowboats and rowed to the second ship. And trust me, the men on there are going, oh, no. And what did they do? When the first Sons of Liberty arrived, they went, here, let me help you out. Let's go look. This is where we keep the tea. In fact, I'll help you throw it overboard. So they weren't roughed up, but they still threw the tea over. And that's what would cause, or that would lead to the Boston Tea Party. And how do you think the British reacted? The government went nuts. A lot of Whigs, the opposition party said, you're going too far. But they wanted revenge. And they would pass a series of laws called the Coercive Acts. Coercive literally means to punish. Does everyone have this? Everyone have this now? You want to talk about the thing for the, who had signed up for the, registered for the AP? At least we're consistent in here. Please get it done in 2 days. Because if you don't have it by Thursday, let's go for Friday. Then everyone who doesn't have it has to bring us donuts. Who thinks that's a good idea? You like that idea? I know, let's go donuts, but they should also bring us food, right? A catered meal. Okay, so the Coercive Acts. The colonists called them the intolerable. Now, it's going to take a few months to get back, so we're now into 1774. And number one, close Boston Harbor. How is Boston, the residents there are supposed to make a living if you close the harbor down? They can't, can they? By the way, who predicted that they would do this? Just imagine I had it written up here. I erased it. The Patriots said they'd destroy our economic well-being, wouldn't they? And they didn't. Told you so. That's what the Patriots could say. I knew they would do it. They're tyrants. Next, 2, close the Massachusetts Colonial Assembly. No self-government anymore. no laws, told you so, and if they do it in Boston, they're going to do it in Pennsylvania, they're going to do it in Georgia. Well, I'm kind of much. Next, remember the Boston Massacre, the trial was in Boston. No more. British officials, so British officials, including soldiers, if they committed a crime, they would be tried in Britain. Now you can understand the British point of view. They wouldn't get a fair trial in, let's say, Boston. But can you imagine how mad colonists would be? British soldiers or tax collectors or whatever could steal, could loot, could rape, could murder. And then they would go to London and they said they would get off scot-free. That's what they believed. So it looked like it was just going to be an excuse for British officials to do anything they wanted. After this, though, every colonial power would do this law for their colonies, including the United States. So they'd just be let off scot-free and go back. The U.S. did it when they took big hunks of Afghanistan and Iraq. Afghanistan is more complex than that. And it just infuriated the Iraqis and Afghans. American soldiers or contractors or government officials will commit crimes and then be tried in the U.S. It just infuriated them. So this is what colonial powers do. And it still exists today. It's called extraterritoriality. Don't worry about it. 4, quartering troops. There goes our liberty. It's all gone. Another quartering act. Were the Patriots upset by this? Or is this what they wanted? What's that?
They're mad.
Think they're mad? The Patriots wanted to prove to people that the British were tyrants. And what have the British just done? They've proven they're tyrants, haven't they? Patriots, and do get this down, were overjoyed. Patriots were overjoyed by this. The Patriots were like, yes, thank you. We wanted you to overreact, and you did it. And now we can say, we told you they were tyrants, and they are tyrants. And then, and so this is actions all the way down the road. This is what terrorism wants. Terrorist attacks want a political action like this. On September 11, 2001, when mostly Saudi Arabians in a group called Al-Qaeda attacked the United States, the goal of the attack was to get the U.S. to way overreact and to attack places in the Middle East. Because that's what they said. They're going to attack us. And what did the U.S. do? Exactly what they wanted. Now, let's be clear about it. I'm not saying it always works out the way they want it or doesn't work out. But that's what they wanted, and the U.S. did it. It's actually kind of startling how the U.S. is like, okay, we'll do exactly what you wanted us to do. Now, it's complex then. But still, they want that reaction. And then, it wasn't related, but Parliament passed the Quebec Act. But to the Patriots, this was another example of tyranny. Quebec's the remnants of New France. They speak French. They're Catholics. It was hard for Britain to govern them. They were worried about rebellion up here. So the first part was actually a very smart move. They told these French settlers, you're part of the British Empire, but we'll let you speak French and we'll let you be Catholic. That was a big move. But then the other part logic, part to punish the colonies. See all this area in dark green? They decided to administer all this in Quebec. Now there's a logic to it. It's hard to get over the mountains, but with the river and lakes, it's easier to administer from Quebec. There's a logic to it. But you combine the two parts of the Quebec Act to an already angry 13 colonies, and they saw it as, you're taking our land and giving it to whom? The French. Now they're not. They're British. It's a British colony. They just speak French there now. But that's how radical it become. They're going to take our land and give it to the French, and we're next. The French are going to get it, and not only that, they're going to, just like they did in Quebec, they're going to make us speak French and make us all become. make us all become Catholics.
Good afternoon, staff and students. As previously promised, we are now going to practice a lock-in-place drill. Once again, this is a drill. So teachers, at this time, we are now initiating a lock-in-place. Please make sure to lock classroom doors and windows and do not allow students to leave the room. Wait for further instructions on when it's safe for students to leave your assigned area.
So we might be here for a few days.
And check hallways as well. And please wait for further instructions. Thank you.
They gave us an emergency bucket years ago that had like a flashlight and various things. And it was so funny. It was an emergency bucket. Because they thought, well, what if something happens? And the best part was, so that a few things like 5 Band-Aids, silly stuff like that, and 1 granola bar. I thought that was so funny. And 1 granola bar. And so, like Lord of the Flies, we'll all fight for it. All right, so everyone locked down, windows are locked, everyone feels safe? Huh? Well, lockdown, all the lockdown is just there's somebody in the hallway. There's not like an emergency. Like it's not like a threat. It's just that and not a threat in the building.
What do you do if it's a threat in the building?
Huh? Basically the same thing. So, and if it's a real threat, those curtains would be drawn and we would, Back to this. So, that shows you, but it also shows you one more thing. It also shows you one more thing. How crazy people can become. Absolutely no way they're going to give this to the French. But they had gotten so scared that they believed it. And not only that, people believe crazy stuff. Insane stuff. And it's worse today, I think, than ever. And we do a unit in special topics, the elective I teach, where we go through like different conspiracies and conspiracy theories. And some of them are just crazy what people believe. You know, that the years 600 to 1400 didn't exist, and the Earth is flat, and nobody landed on the moon, which we know is true, and aliens killed President Kennedy, which of course is true, and that's where they're keeping it from. No, people believe stuff, and today it is unreal. So back to this. And so this would lead to the First Continental Congress. What city did the First Continental Congress meet in? The Second Continental Congress would meet there too. The Declaration of Independence would meet there, and so would the Constitution be written there. What city? Philadelphia. This is Quebec, yeah. So they met in Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress, right after this. They're mostly patriots.
Staff and students, thank you for your participation. Once again, that was a lock-in-place drill. Examples of situations that would initiate a lock-in-place or a student or staff medical emergency, someone on foot running around the school area, or a disturbance in the hallways. And once again, this would be due to an issue in the building as opposed to other drills where it's more of a outside situation. So once again, that was a lock-in-place. Thank you for your participation. Have a great rest of the day.
Tomorrow, I'm going to have you all out to run randomly in the hallway. We probably get a lock-in-place drill. Okay. So they made in Philadelphia. It's right in the middle. 12 of the 13 colonies came, not Georgia. And what they did is here, all right, we might have war. And so they would endorse. So essentially vote to agree to what is called the Suffolk Resolves. Suffolk is a little town in Massachusetts. Their colonial assembly met there illegally. And the two big things about the resolves, we better begin to organize our militia, especially around Boston, and begin to store gunpowder, arms. Arms are military weapons. So begin to store them outside of Boston, like a place maybe 20 miles outside of Boston, like Concord. And the militia, especially in the Northeast, had been training and practicing. These militias up here were basically drinking clubs. They kind of walk around on Sunday, then go to the tavern. Tavern, they could eat, had alcohol, and also would be a place where like it was like a hotel. But Up here. Down here, the militias were better because of fear of what? Yeah, that fear of slavery. So, and the second part is they made a resolution. I'm sorry, not resolution, declaration of rights. The British were infringing on our rights as Englishmen. And that's what they said, our rights as Englishmen. And grievances. And this is how they're doing it. And they blamed Parliament. Parliament is passing laws to infringe on our rights, to live in our homes, to search us without a warrant, all these kind of things. And then they decided, all right, then let's go home. And that fall, they went home saying, we'll come back in May of 1775 and see what happens. So from October to May, the thought was, okay, hopefully things will calm down. A lot of patriots, but there are still a few people loyalists, and most people there would never have dreamed about actual revolution. A few were thinking, pushing it, trying to kind of guide it along. But what would happen was, around Boston, the only troops in the colonies, they began to send out small little raids that winter, a small little raid called a sortie, to find those arms storages. But it was wet. It's all mud, dirt roads, so they couldn't really get very far. So they waited until the roads began to dry in April. April 18th and 19th. So April 18th and 19th, 1775. They decided to march and destroy one of these little arms storages at Concord. Thus, Lexington and Concord. They were going to march at night, arrive at Lexington at sunup, and cook breakfast. And there's a big, it looks like a park, but they called it the Commons, where also they would drill the militia, and then march the rest of the way to Concord and burn down basically it was kind of half underground little shack with gunpowder. There was not hardly any gunpowder. Most of the colonists had never fired a weapon, and they didn't have enough time to practice. Didn't have enough ammunition or black powder to practice. And so, the plan was march to Lexington. But in Massachusetts, did you miss something? I'm sorry.
The British is marching?
Yeah, the British are marching. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on that. The British under General Gage. So imagine this long column, about two abreast of about 1,000 or about 500 men marching through pretty hilly country. It's actually really pretty. The road that goes from Boston to Lexington to Concord goes right along that path. And they knew in Massachusetts this might happen. So they got militia with the idea being that younger militia need to be called out quickly. They could be forewarned with an outrider, a rider going through yelling a warning and come out quickly. What do they call them? You ever heard the term Minutemen? The Minutemen. So the British crossed over to the Charlestown Peninsula by boat, and then began to march there. And outriders, most famously, who's the most famous one? There's also William Dawes and a couple others. They rode it. What did they yell? Okay, that comes from a poem from the 1830s. Do you think they yelled the British are coming? You know why I asked that, you're probably thinking no. But what did they think? Almost every colonist, what did they think of themselves as? British. So if they yelled, the British are coming, wouldn't that be like they going down the road yelling, here we come, we're coming, we are on our way. So they yelled probably the red coats or the lobster backs or something like that. And the militia from the little farms, little villages, they all went to the central location of Lexington, or a bunch of them did, a few hundred. And they got there, it's pitch black, middle of the night. And where were the British? They thought the British might already be there, like going to burn down their homes. The British soldiers. I don't know if you know this, but horses are actually faster than people marching. Did you know that? Yeah, that's science. And so, they were there 3 hours before the British even arrived. They got there scared, wide awake, and dark. Nothing. So what did they do? Well, this is all actually part of the national park there. They went to a local tavern. There's a little tavern right there, and they started to drink hot buttered rum. Now, it's not that high in alcohol, but it's still alcohol. Basically, they take this big thing of rum and they add all kinds of stuff. It's really thick. They'd add literally butter or lard into it. And then stir it up, add whatever spices they had. It'd be almost like a meal. You know what lard is, right? Fat. Just animal fat. Which, of course, is delicious, right? Who'd want to meat just eat that plain? But those who don't have this done will have to eat lard. Big bowl of lard and chocolate sauce. So that. And so they're drinking, trying to calm down, and then the British arrived. Tired. It was unusually hot for April. What are their uniforms made out of in 1773? Wool. Now, as we all know, if it's warm, wool will keep the heat out. And so you're actually cooler wearing wool in hot weather. And so, yeah, next time you're in the jungle, put on a wool coat. You feel so much better. Don't do that. They were miserable, hungry, mad. They had to march all night, and they got to Lexington, and out literally pouring out of the tavern come about 150, 200 drunken militia. Tired, angry British soldiers who would love to get their hands on those colonists and the drunken militia. That's what we call a recipe for disaster. And somebody opened fire, and that would be the first shots of the American Revolution. What did the militia do after a couple shots? Ran away, and the British didn't stop for breakfast. Gage ordered them to march to Concord, so they're really mad. And that's how the war started. If you go there today in Lexington, they say this is where the war began. They called it the shot heard around the world. But in Concord, they'll make it very clear. They ran away. The war started in Concord. My wife and I, when we were there, we stopped at this little restaurant in Concord, and just going to get lunch or whatever it was, some meal. And the host came by, and she's like, "No, did you go to Lexington?" She's, like hosts are very friendly. It's part of the job. And we said, "Oh yes." And then this whole face changed. She said, "Don't believe what they said. The war started here in Concord. They're cowards. They ran away in Lexington. We hate Lexington." Okay. So do I. Don't spit my food. Okay, so actually at Concord, there was a sharp fight, and the exhausted British soldiers did have a fight on a bridge, and Gage had said it's not worth it, started to march back. But over 1,000 militia came and took pot shots at them all the way. 20 British soldiers would die. And that would be the beginning of the war, and now they'd be bottled up in Boston. Now, that's April. Who knows what would have happened if not for this? Because news of this and war went all through the colonies. And they were supposed to meet 2 weeks later in Philadelphia. And as people started, or representatives started going to Philadelphia, a lot of the ones who were wavering or more loyalists, they didn't go. So the Second Continental Congress, which met from 1775 all the way to 1783, they were almost all patriots. Because those who wavered didn't go. And they're fired up. And the first thing they did is, we mentioned this yesterday, who did they pick as a leader? And what colony were they hoping this would get in? And then they sent an olive branch petition. This olive branch petition means peace, and it comes from the Torah or the Old Testament, depending for Judaism or Christianity. It's also in the Quran. But olive branch means where's my writers? Olive branch means peace, and they sent this to London, basically telling the King of Parliament, we can still go back. We can go back. We don't have to have war. Well, as they waited for this message in Boston, militia surrounded Boston, looking or sitting in the hills. Not to tell you something before we get going. I'll finish this up real quick. I'm going to draw you a map of Boston. And I know some of you are going to be jealous or maybe even upset, but I have amazing cartography skills. I was just born with them. I'm just a natural map maker. So don't be jealous of the fact that I make wonderful maps, okay? I know some of you are going to be mad. I'm just like this. So, who's been to Boston? So there's one. All of you will feel like you've been Boston when you walk out the store. You ready for the map of Boston? You ready? It's going to blow you away. Here's Boston. So here's the Dorchester Heights and then Boston. Okay, that's Boston. Now, the city of Boston is here on this, I guess it kind of looks vaguely, doesn't it kind of look like a ghost? Here's Boston. Here's the Charles Peninsula. This is the harbor then. How do we know it's harbor? Waves. Ship. Shark. Walrus. Another walrus, so we have walleye. Right? And so, here's Boston. The British were on hills overlooking it. As Washington's riding north in May of 1775, so right after Lexington and Concord, we're coming to a battle called Bunker Hill, even though it happened on Breed's Hill. But the order was Bunker Hill. And the militia under Israel Putnam decided to put a fort on Breed's Hill. They got to Breed's Hill, and there was another they were ordered to put a fort on Bunker Hill. They got to Bunker Hill, and there's another hill right below them that got in their way, so they put the fort on that. But since the original order was for Bunker Hill, everybody calls this the Battle of Bunker Hill. And the fort is nothing more than they made a quick square. The men brought shovels or whatever, dug a 3-foot trench in a square, and then took the dirt and piled it in front. So you have a mound in front. Militia always runs away, but they have a little bit of protection. It's right here is what they call the breastwork. They can feel protected, maybe not run away. They only had enough powder for an average of about 5 or 6 rounds apiece. And so when the British sent over 1,000 men to drive them out, that's when William Prescott, who commanded the fort, to save ammunition, knew they couldn't hit anything anyway, so that every bullet had to count, told the men to not fire until what? You heard that, like whites in their eyes? That's about 20 yards. Gage sent over 1,000 troops to drive them out. They charged up the hill. The British plan was, the British geared up to get revenge. Fire once, fixed bayonets, and just walked right over them. So they fired once, but the colonists were behind the mound, so they felt protected. They got to 20 yards, and all the militia opened up at once. We call that a volley. And it knocked hundreds of British soldiers down in one shot. The British pulled back, but they're British. This is the way their army is. They went back again. And they got driven back again. And now the militia was out of ammunition. And so they acted like they're going to stay and fight, and at the last second, they retreated. The British took the fort, but lost a third of their men. They went a couple more victories like that, and they'll be out of soldiers. The problem was, both sides thought, one big battle, everyone's going to quit fighting. No. Washington arrived right after. And one big thing, we mentioned this yesterday. What's the fort when they bought the cannon? Which also makes a what? Great thing for children, right? Washington got these cannon and put the cannon right here, Dorchester Heights. And General Gage looked at that, and he's like, oh no, another Bunker Hill, I can't afford it. And that's why that fall, the British pulled out. There were no British troops in 13 colonies. What did the Patriots think just happened? They won. And then the king's answer to the Olive Branch Petition arrived. And it's a proclamation saying they're all traitors and what's going to happen to them. Kiss them out. What do you call when you cut off all the 4 limbs? Drawn and quartered. And that's why the Second Continental Congress would meet and they would decide after that, hey, we're condemned to death anyways. Let's just declare independence. So there we get that. Those 2 things. They left Boston in that proclamation. They figured, why not? They debated all spring in Philadelphia and finally decided, yes, I know right before the bell rang, on July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress declared independence. That is Independence Day. John Adams said that day will be celebrated through all the history of the United States. The problem was the document to justify it wasn't ready yet.
What was the day?
July 2nd. That's Independence Day. The document would not be ready for 2 more days, and all the members of Congress had went home. Only the president was left. 1776. Yeah. John Hancock signed it, and no one else signed it. That's why his name is so big. He's the only one left. But the document said July 4th, and so have a good day, everybody. Independence Day, July 2nd. How's the noggin?
It's not good. So good. I'm sorry.
Is it kind of like a nice little haze?
Yeah.
Which isn't nice.
Yeah, that's
Be careful. This is your second one. Sorry.
yeah.
It's off. Any city that's old, well, look at Helena. You can tell the first part's like around Last Chance Falls, just a mess.
Yeah.
And that's actually been kind of improved. Boston's pretty cool.
We went from the church hall where we rode from to for like a block away, and somehow in that block we couldn't find our way back, and we ended up spending like an hour trying to get back to our port to take a taxi to the airport so we could fly back here.
I believe it.
And then tomorrow I'll be gone for the sign.
Decoration, we're going to go through all the big details of decoration.
Okay, so just
So I already gave the reading assignment, but that's a big one because you have to go through all the flaws.
Okay.
And it's huge, so you have to give it to someone else, and I will film it like I did here. In fact, get on camera. Come on, wave. Get down, wave.
we're good.
Yeah, very good. All right. And bring me a rock. Okay.
Okay.
Good. I'll see you Thursday. Is that for me? Is that a gift? Do I get anything?
Yes. I have a student in your table who's pick up the best.
Right?
Mina Green.
Oh, Mina.
Yeah.
Oh, this. Okay.
Yes.
Isn't Madison in your APU?
I have like 3 Madisons this year.
Oh.
You're gonna.
I hope they're all just
2 of them are. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try not to forget, but I'm very bad at that. But
I will make her
on
remind
record, I'm trying to remember. No. What's your? I'm gonna say you can't watch it. You can watch it, but you can't listen. So you're gonna be outside. I'll take them. I'll take them all.
I didn't get that sign.
Yeah, it does matter.
It does?
We're in school.
Well, they text them all.
Well, we're not gonna start tomorrow.
Oh,
So please bring it. No, I'm gonna go through all the. I'm trying to get as much of the tactics. Watching all.
Okay, I thought it was today.
But I just wanted it today. Please get it tomorrow because since we're in school.
Because we did that with the bill credit thing, and it's like you don't need to have a signature for it. It was on.
Yeah. Don't say anything. Yeah. No. In school, you have to.
Okay.
It's because Chris was happy about that. I was like,
You're the charge of this. Yeah, we're really the law. So.
He's like,
I know you're old enough, but you gotta make sure. All right, everybody, action statement number 1, 2. Jay, we talked about this. Everyone's got 14. Yep. Okay, so 34, is that where we're at now? You went down 20? You know, maybe someone had $10 they could give me and go back down to 5. I'm just throwing that out. All right, so 1 to 5. Oh, when we go to get this out, please put this name if it's not clear. But please turn this in if you don't have it. Yes. 19. Let's put it this way. You will either be pleasantly surprised or disappointed when we get to 5. All right, everybody, turn it in. If you haven't turned it in, is it signed, picture? Okay. If you don't have it, you have to have it tomorrow. And it doesn't matter your age or in school, I have to give it. If you don't do it, maybe I'll let you. No, I even have a better idea. Because we already talked about this. He's going to be in the stocks looking in.
Who?
Did somebody yell my name?
No.
Am I just hearing things? Am I losing my what's left of my enfeebled mind? Yes. Write your name. Isn't that a great pencil? So the quiz is today. Sorry, I'm. Wait for it. What animals are these? Walrus. Walrus. There's more than one. Huh? We should go to Boston. Who wants to go to Boston? I gotta tell you, some of the best Italian food I've ever had was in Jordan, Montana. No, it was in Boston. I've been to Jordan many times, and my summer job in college was delivering beer, and we delivered beer to Jordan, and that's the only place. No. All right, number one. How tall? Just feel like just shut up. So, you better get this one. What was the resolution that would give the president a blank check to do anything they wanted after Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated? Yeah, you thought, yeah, no. Do anything he wanted to stop aggression in Southeast Asia. Number two, the Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, claimed who was invading South Vietnam, and therefore we had no choice but to defend our allies there. Who was invading? Specifically, what country was invading? I'll give you a hint. It's not Austria. So erase that. What country? So there's 14, right? So let's skip to 8. How's that? Yes, there's 2 Vietnams. There's also a couple other countries right next door. There's a lot of countries. There at that time there were like 160. Number 3. Now there's over 200. Number 3. What was the trail from North Vietnam to South Vietnam to bring supplies? What did the U.S. call it? What did they call it? The something, which could be one word, it could be 70 words. Something trail. Yeah. Yeah.
I have zero faith in myself.
Number 4. You're done. Want me to look at it and shake my head? Number 4. What was the offensive by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong in 1968? That surprised U.S. and South Vietnamese forces, but ultimately failed tactically on the ground. What was it called? The whole offensive. And number 5. Right before that offensive, where was the United States convinced? They were convinced that the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong were going to attack. It was a base that they had surrounded. They thought it'd be another Dien Bien Phu. What was that base in northern Vietnam? If you look at this map, you'll notice it's not on. But if this was, let's say, South Vietnam, right here, if you might like, right below the DMZ. There's a little town named Lang Bay nearby. Does that help? I really want to go there too. And well, you guys can take a little yellow school bus. I will fly those buses. So Would you like a bonus question?
Yeah.
Is there only 5? Oh no, I'm literally already.
Bonus! The bonus question. I started playing with my family. Bonus question. Who did LBJ defeat in the election of 1964? Who did he defeat? Are those some chips? In my class? Never. Okay. Can you read these? Raise your hand.
5.
Yes. Number 2. So Dean Rusk, the Secretary of State, I told you how dumb Johnson thought he was. Okay. Dean Rusk, he claimed that who was invading South Vietnam? So it wasn't a civil war, it was an invasion. What country was invading? Any other repeats? Yes. 5. What base did the U.S. believe was going to be attacked right before the answer to number 4?
Lifeline, phone a friend, departure.
No. Huh? Get as close, as long as we can make it out.
I'm not going to be anywhere close.
I just did. Like 2 seconds ago. Dean Rusk claimed who was invading South Vietnam, and that's where the U.S. was defending.
I'm phoning a friend.
So it's not a civil war, it's an invasion. I'm not gonna wait. Who is invading?
I don't know.
That's what the U.S. went. All right. That's great. Go and pass it to the person behind you. Goes in the rear, pass it to the front.
I don't know. I just can't believe it. I
Number
don't know.
1. Maxwell Taylor was about 5'11".
No, wait.
Oh, who doesn't have, while we're passing, who doesn't have the platoon thing signed?
What is this? That's
Please get it in.
No.
We just have to have
How
it.
this works.
I know. Number 1.
Can we? What's that?
Number 1. Oh, you heard that? Number 1. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution, Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, something to that effect. Number 2, North Vietnam.
I thought so bad. I changed my answer.
North Vietnam was a big, yeah, with the help of the Chinese and with the help of the Soviets, but it's North Vietnam. It's a nation. Which it wasn't. It was much more. Now, North Vietnam started sending troops when the U.S. started sending troops. Before that, they just sent aid, advisors, look like the U.S.
Can we get them?
Number 3, what trail? The Ho Chi Minh Trail. Number 4, the Tet Offensive. Number 5,
Slow your roll there, please.
K Song.
Did anybody get that?
Nobody.
Yeah. They mentioned K Song like 4 times in the reading. How did? Yeah.
Partridge.
Who was that?
No,
I know it wasn't you. Oh no, you got it. All right, bonus question. The bonus question: Barry Goldwater, AUH2O. Yes. Take the total number of rocks and track it from 14. No, track it from 5. 1 for the bonus. Hand it back. Sorry.
who was gonna remember K
I
song?
believe you, but I can't give it.
It's not so bad. I said my lines. I was like, I don't know.
State of mind.
Who got 5? Oh, they got 4 better. Raise your hand. 4 better. Oh, this guy can't get it up. I'm sorry, I'm over here. But I'm not collecting this. No, turn it.
Yeah, I did too. And also the fact that he said
Danae's a good guy.
he said he's an idiot. So I was like, oh, he did it at the same time.
Okay.
What trail? I don't know. And I think I'm so dumb. I'm so dumb. You're not dumb.
So, she's on a field trip.
Probably us.
We got a bunch of people going on field trips today. Who's even gone tomorrow on a field trip? So we are going to start platoon.
Field trip to my grade. My grade was not hard.
tomorrow. So I got to talk a little bit about weapons. So we got one more thing to finish up. Everyone go and take your notes out. I got to talk about the weapons and set things up. What was the law that was passed just after Johnson committed forces? And to him, it seemed to show that his strategy was working. Say it again. It was a Civil Rights Act of 65, but everyone calls it the Voting Rights Act. Everyone calls it the Voting Rights Act.
So this.
Also Medicare and Medicaid. So the Johnson, it's working. We're beating communism. And they just got done in Ill-Train Valley, and they just were showing that. And there were a couple of films. What was the weapon, or what was the unit that landed at Ill-Train Valley? What was that unit?
Oh.
Yeah, the Air Cav. So the 1st Cavalry Division, well, actually, first, it was created right before World War II. And at first, it was combined horses and tanks. Right before World War II. Then it became tanks and fought in the Pacific. And then they took that in the 1950s and gave them helicopters. And the idea was they could move very quickly, move in and out, attack, light, mobile, fast. Each helicopter could hold about 8 soldiers. And so with that, they really thought this weapon would be huge. Of course, helicopters are incredibly vulnerable. Of course, that's one of the reasons why helicopters are so. What?
Your paper fell.
Okay, they all fall.
No, it's on the ground.
No, what fell?
The German word.
Oh!
It's the German word.
Do you remember what this?
Backfighting.
A face that deserves to be punched. The German word for that. Backflapping.
That's not how you say that.
I know, but you're German. You just talk like that. You're close enough.
The word history in German is very scary.
Geschichte.
Butterfly.
German's such a good language. Okay, so.
Mentally.
But that's, by the way, don't we all know somebody who's that applies to? I figure you all point at me, so I actually feel pretty good right now. But here's the
Oh, I
thing.
thought that'd be weird.
So there's Tonkin Gulf, and here's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Here's Da Nang, where they first sent soldiers in. And the thing was, in this Ill-Train Valley, which was right there, they sent troops in with these helicopters. The thought was they could, this is what they're hoping, win a quick victory, kill as many North Vietnamese as possible. What's the plan? Kill so many, they eventually do what? And what do we call this? A war of attrition, which is horrible. And they would literally count everybody. They called it body counts. And they go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, there's a blood spot, 7. There's a leaf that's moved. That was probably dragging a dead body, 8. I'm not making that up. There's a big explosion. That was probably 12 people there. So now we're at 20. How do you get promotion? Kill. So the body counts were just ridiculous. They made no sense. But they dropped him in here, and they showed the video of that, and there was some film. And what they did is they had a couple landing zones where they landed. The idea was they would land, hold those landing zones, LZs they're called, and then attack. The problem was the North Vietnamese overran the landing zones. And it was almost a complete defeat of one of the most elite units in the United States Army. And the war had just started. By the way, that's a problem, isn't it? You're not really sure you want to get involved. You do it. If you almost lose, and in fact it was basically a loss, right away, doesn't it make it that much harder to pull out? Because don't you now you have to justify why those men died? And you have to also prove, we don't lose! So, okay. Did I knock this down, or I think you did. So you're gonna have to do something. You're gonna have to run down the hall and see if you can trigger another drill.
Yeah, trying to get to retirement, look it up.
Yeah, so.
Get down there and pick it up.
So we have a little bit left of the Battle of Hill Train. I want to watch that last little bit. And this is a bloody fight. There's a really good book about this called We Were Soldiers. The book is really good. And then Mel Gibson got involved and became a horrific movie. Has anyone ever seen the movie?
What movie?
We Were Soldiers. There's good elements of it, but it's
Mostly trash.
oh,
Gibson baby, so my.
yeah.
Well, there's no Gibson.
Good
Good
question.
question.
No way.
Oh, do I win? Anybody?
Oh, my God. Yes.
So this is right where we quit. I think we filmed